Welcome, dear friends, to a comprehensive journey through 135 facts about Pokemon evolution, that mysterious process where creatures transform into new forms, gaining power, changing appearance, and sometimes altering their entire nature through mechanisms that science cannot fully explain and that trainers witness without understanding the biological, magical, or spiritual forces that enable these dramatic metamorphoses that define the Pokemon experience and that separate these creatures from ordinary animals whose forms remain constant throughout lives, that evolution doesn't punctuate with sudden transformations into fundamentally different beings. If you enjoy this exploration of evolution's mysteries, please subscribe and share in the comments which evolution surprised you most, or which evolutionary requirement seemed strangest. I love hearing from fellow trainers about the transformations that captured their imaginations. So settle into comfort, close your eyes whenever sleep beckons, and let us begin this gentle journey through evolution facts, told soothingly like bedtime stories about change and growth, about how creatures develop and transform, and about the strange requirements, unusual triggers, and unexpected outcomes that make Pokemon evolution endlessly fascinating to study and to experience as trainers who guide these transformations while remaining forever changed by witnessing miracles of metamorphosis. Fact 1. Pokemon evolution was inspired by tadpoles transforming into frogs and by butterflies emerging from cocoons. According to creator Satoshi Tajiri, who wanted to capture the wonder of metamorphosis that he observed in nature during childhood, spent collecting insects. The concept translated biological metamorphosis into game mechanic, where Pokemon could dramatically transform during players' adventures, creating attachment and excitement as creatures evolved into new forms that players anticipated through careful training and leveling that preceded evolutionary moments when familiar companions transformed into different beings, retaining memories and personalities despite altered appearances. Fact 2. Evolution in Pokemon occurs instantly rather than gradually, with creatures transforming in seconds through process that physics cannot explain, given that mass sometimes increases dramatically without apparent source of additional matter. For example, Magikarp weighing 22 pounds evolves into Gyarados weighing 518 pounds, gaining nearly 500 pounds of mass instantaneously through transformation that violates conservation of mass unless evolution draws matter from another dimension, or unless Pokemon contain compressed potential mass that evolution releases into physical form that becomes actual rather than remaining potential. Fact 3. The first Pokemon designed to evolve was Rhydon, according to Game Freak staff who created this ground and rock type before designing most other Pokemon in the original roster. Rhydon's existence established that Pokemon could have multiple evolutionary stages, with Rhyhorn evolving into Rhydon, demonstrating the concept that would become central to franchise appeal, where creatures developed through stages rather than remaining static throughout their existence, like most video game monsters that players encountered in other RPGs predating Pokemon's revolutionary evolution system. Fact 4. Evolution can be cancelled by pressing the B button during transformation sequence, allowing trainers to prevent evolutions they don't want for strategic or personal reasons. This mechanic acknowledges that evolution isn't always desirable, despite generally making Pokemon stronger, recognizing that some players prefer earlier forms aesthetically, or that competitive strategy sometimes favors unevolved forms who learn moves faster than evolved forms, or who benefit from items like Eviolite that boost unevolved Pokemon's defenses, making them viable alternatives to evolved forms in specific team compositions requiring particular stat distributions. Fact 5. Eevee has more evolution possibilities than any other Pokemon, with 8 different evolved forms accessible through various methods, including elemental stones, friendship plus time of day, friendship near specific locations, and knowing fairy-type move with sufficient friendship. This versatility makes Eevee popular among trainers who appreciate having options and who enjoy that single species can become water, electric, fire, psychic, dark, grass, ice, or fairy type depending on which evolutionary path trainers pursue through items or conditions that unlock specific evolutions from shared base forms' incredible evolutionary potential. Fact 6. Some Pokemon like Nincada produce 2 Pokemon when evolving if specific conditions are met, with Nincada evolving into Ninjask while simultaneously creating Shedinja if trainer has empty party slot and spare Pokeball in inventory. This unique evolution creates 2 Pokemon from one, with Shedinja representing discarded exoskeleton that somehow gained independent life and consciousness, separate from Ninjask, who emerged from shell that became Shedinja, rather than being merely empty molt that normal insects leave behind. When metamorphosing without their shed exoskeletons, becoming living creatures with their own existence and agency. Fact 7. Friendship-based evolution wasn't introduced until Generation 2 with Golbat evolving into Crobat, Chansey evolving into Blissey, and Pichu evolving into Pikachu when happiness reached sufficient levels. This mechanic acknowledged that bonds between trainers and Pokemon matter beyond just experience points and levels, creating system where treating Pokemon well through keeping them in party, giving them vitamins, avoiding letting them faint, and winning battles accelerated evolution for species requiring affection rather than just combat experience, to trigger transformations into final forms that friendship unlocks. Fact 8. Trade evolution exists partially as anti-piracy measure, making it difficult to complete Pokédex without legitimate copies and without access to other players who own games. According to developers who designed trade evolutions to encourage social interaction and to combat rental culture in Japan, where children rented games instead of purchasing them, species like Machoke, Graveler, Haunter, and Kadabra require trading to evolve, forcing players to interact with others who own games and potentially encouraging purchases when rental copies couldn't access full content without trading partners. Fact 9. Magneton evolves into Magnezone only when leveled in areas with special magnetic fields, limiting evolution to specific locations like Mount Coronet in Sinnoh or Chargestone Cave in Unova. This location-based requirement suggests that environments contain energies or properties that enable certain evolutions that couldn't occur elsewhere, raising questions about whether magnetic fields genuinely trigger evolution or whether locations possess other qualities that game simplifies as magnetism for mechanical purposes that don't fully explain why specific places enable specific transformations that become impossible in areas lacking whatever mysterious property allows evolution. Fact 10. Carablast and Shelmet must be traded for each other specifically to evolve, with Carablast becoming Escavalier by stealing Shelmet's shell, while Shelmet becomes Excelgor after losing its armor. This unique coevolution suggests that trade itself isn't what triggers transformation, but rather that specific interaction between these two species during trade enables evolutions that wouldn't occur if either species were traded for different Pokémon, or if they were simply exposed to each other without trade, somehow facilitating shell theft that both species apparently benefit from. Despite Shelmet losing protective covering. Fact 11. Inkay evolves into Malamar only when leveled while holding the Nintendo 3DS upside down, using console's gyroscope to detect physical orientation as evolution requirement. This unprecedented mechanic forced players to literally flip their systems during level up, creating unusual evolution trigger that acknowledged real-world player actions as factor in Pokémon transformation, rather than keeping evolution entirely within game world, where Pokémon exist independent of players' physical manipulation of hardware devices they play games on, breaking fourth wall between game reality and player reality. Fact 12. Meltan is the only mythical Pokémon that can evolve, transforming into Melmetal when given 400 Meltan candies in Pokémon Go before transferring to main series games. This evolution requirement creates enormous grind for players seeking Melmetal, who must capture hundreds of Melton in mobile game before accumulating sufficient candy through catching and transferring duplicates, making Melmetal among the most difficult Pokémon to obtain through standard methods available to players without access to special events or to trading with others who completed candy requirements. Fact 13. Some evolutions are gender-specific, with only male Kirlia evolving into Gallade and only female Snorunt evolving into Frostlass, creating branched evolutionary paths where species splits into different forms depending on gender, combined with evolutionary stone use. These gender restrictions suggest that sexual dimorphism in these species is so extreme that males and females don't just look different, but actually evolve into entirely different species, rather than into male and female versions of same species, implying that Kirlia and Snorunt are transitional forms that haven't yet differentiated into their true adult forms. Fact 14. Wurmple's evolution into either Silcoon or Cascoon was originally based on personality values, hidden numbers that determined which cocoon form Wurmple would become when evolving at level 7. This created unpredictability where trainers couldn't control whether their Wurmple would evolve into Beautifly or Dustox, making the bug type's evolution feel more natural and less subject to trainer control compared to most evolutionary paths that players could direct through careful planning and through knowing which triggers produced which results when multiple evolution options existed for single species. Fact 15. Feebas evolves into Milotic only when its beauty condition stat reaches high levels in Generation 3 and IV, requiring players to feed it specific Pokeblocks or Poffins that raised beauty through berries with correct flavors. This extremely difficult evolution made Milotic one of rarest Pokémon despite Feebas being relatively common once found, creating prestige around owning Milotic that indicated player dedication and knowledge about contest stat mechanics that most casual players ignored while focusing on battle-relevant stats rather than on condition stats affecting Pokémon appearance and contest performance. Fact 16. In later generations, Feebas's evolution requirement changed to trading while holding Prism Scale, simplifying process but removing the unique beauty-based mechanic that made Milotic's evolution memorable. This change demonstrated how Game Freak sometimes streamlines complicated evolution methods when porting species to new games, balancing accessibility against uniqueness while recognizing that many players found original requirement frustratingly obscure and difficult to achieve without external guides, explaining contest mechanics that games didn't clearly teach during normal play focused on battling rather than on contests. Fact 17. Pancham evolves into Pangoro only when leveled with a dark type in the party, requiring trainers to carry specific Pokemon type alongside Pancham during level up. This party composition requirement created evolution mechanic, where other team members' presence mattered, suggesting that Pancham learns from observing dark types and adopts their qualities during evolution that wouldn't occur if Pancham lacked role models, demonstrating darkness that fighting and dark-type Pangoro embodies. Through transformation that education or observation from dark-type companions apparently enables through mechanisms that games don't explain beyond mechanical requirement. Fact 18. Mantike evolves into Mantine only when leveled with Remoraid in party, creating evolution requiring multi-species interaction similar to Pancham but based on mutualistic relationship where Remoraid attaches to Mantine's fins. The requirement acknowledges that Mantine's design includes Remoraid as symbiotic partner, rather than as purely aesthetic detail, suggesting that Mantike cannot mature into Mantine without establishing partnership with Remoraid, whose presence during evolution enables transformation that solitary Mantike cannot achieve regardless of experience or strength gained through battles that would normally trigger evolution for species evolving through level alone. Fact 19. Sliggoo evolves into Gudra only when leveled during rain in the overworld, requiring specific weather conditions that restrict evolution to rainy routes or to areas where trainers can control weather through moves or through waiting for natural rain cycles. This environmental requirement suggests that dragon-type development requires moisture or that Gudra's biology depends on water in ways that Sliggoo hasn't yet adapted to, making rain essential catalyst for transformation that unlocks Gudra's final form from Sliggoo's intermediate stage that cannot complete development without environmental conditions providing whatever rain contributes to evolution. Fact 20. Galarian Yamask evolves into Runerigus only after taking at least 49 points of damage without fainting, and then walking under specific stone arch in wild area. This absurdly specific requirement made Runerigus one of the most obscure evolutions, with many players never discovering method without consulting external guides, because games provided no hints about damage threshold or about which arch triggered evolution, creating mystery that players needed to solve collectively through community experimentation that eventually revealed bizarre evolution conditions that developers designed without apparently considering how players would discover them. Fact 21. Tyrogue evolves into 3 different Pokémon, depending on whether its attack, defense, or balance stats are highest at level 20, with Hitmonlee requiring higher attack, Hitmonchan requiring higher defense, and Hitmontop requiring equal attack and defense. This stat-based branching created evolution system where training methods determined outcome, with players needing to carefully manage Tyrogue's stat growth through vitamins and through selective battling against Pokémon that yielded specific EV, effort value, distributions, creating desired stat relationships that produced intended evolution rather than alternative forms that different training approaches would create. Fact 22. Clamperl evolves into either Huntail or Gorbis when traded holding Deep Sea Tooth or Deep Sea Scale respectively, creating trade evolution with item variations that produce different results. This mechanic demonstrated that trade evolutions could branch into multiple forms depending on held items, adding complexity to trade evolution category that had previously been straightforward with traded Pokémon, always evolving into single predetermined form rather than having multiple possible outcomes that items determined during trade that served as evolution trigger, combined with items serving as evolution director controlling which specific form resulted from trade. Fact 23. Burmy has 3 different forms depending on where it last battled: plant cloak in grass, sandy cloak in caves and beaches, and trash cloak in buildings. With these forms determining whether female Burmy evolves into Mothim or into one of 3 Wormadam forms. Male Burmy always becomes Mothim regardless of cloak, but female Burmy's evolution depends on environmental exposure, creating bug and grass type, bug and ground type, or bug and steel type Wormadam, whose type and appearance reflect environments that influenced Burmy's development before evolution, permanently locked in characteristics that Wormadam inherited from Burmy's pre-evolution form. Fact 24. Rockruff evolves into different Lycanroc forms depending on time of day and on ability, with midday form evolving during day, midnight form evolving during night, and dusk form evolving during evening if Rockruff has owned tempo ability. This created 3-way split where evolution time and hidden ability both mattered, producing rock type with different stats, moves, and appearances, depending on when evolution occurred and on whether Rockruff possessed special ability that most specimens lacked, making dusk form rarer than alternatives that any Rockruff could achieve through timing level up appropriately without requiring specific ability. Fact 25. Cosmoem evolves into either Solgaleo or Lunala, depending on game version, with Sun producing Solgaleo and Moon producing Lunala, regardless of player preference. This version-exclusive evolution meant that single player couldn't obtain both evolutions without trading, creating parallel legendary lines that shared pre-evolutions, but that diverged into version-specific forms that collectors needed to trade for unless they owned both versions and could transfer Pokémon between games through Pokémon Bank or through home cloud storage services that subsequent generations introduced for moving Pokémon across games and generations. Fact 26. Poipole evolves into Naganadel only when it knows Dragon Pulse, requiring move tutoring or TM usage before leveling triggers evolution. This move knowledge requirement created precedent for evolutions, requiring specific moves in moveset, preventing Poipole from evolving naturally through leveling alone, and instead requiring player intervention teaching Dragon Pulse before evolution became possible, making Naganadel inaccessible to players who didn't know about requirement or who lacked resources for teaching, move that Poipole couldn't learn naturally through level up, and that required external teaching through tutor or through TM. Fact 27. Lechonk evolves into different Oinkologne forms depending on gender, with male form being brown and female form being pink, creating sexual dimorphism so extreme that they're effectively different Pokémon sharing name and evolutionary origin. This gender-based split demonstrated that sexual dimorphism in Pokémon could extend beyond color variations into completely different appearances, stats, and design philosophies for male versus female forms that barely resembled each other despite both being Oinkologne, evolved from identical Lechonk base form that showed minimal gender differences before evolution amplified subtle variations into dramatic divergence. Fact 28. Evolution stones were originally rare, single-use items that players needed to carefully consider before using and creating meaningful decisions about which Pokémon to evolve when stones were limited resources. In Kanto, each elemental stone appeared only once or twice, forcing players to choose between multiple Pokémon that could use same stone, creating permanence where decisions couldn't easily be reversed unless players restarted or traded for additional stones from other players who made different choices about stone allocation between competing candidates, all wanting same scarce resources. Fact 29. Some Pokémon evolve earlier in later generations than they did originally, with Machoke, Graveler, Kadabra, and Haunter evolving at level 25 in modern games versus original level requirement of level 28 or later. These adjustments reflect Game Freak's recognition that evolution levels sometimes felt too high or too low for game pacing, with changes designed to improve player experience by giving evolved forms earlier when waiting felt frustrating, or later when early evolution made portions of games trivial because players received powerful evolutions before content was designed to challenge them appropriately. Fact 30. Primeape evolves into Annihilape after using Rage Fist 20 times, creating evolution requiring specific move usage that tracked across battles rather than being single battle requirement. This cumulative usage requirement forced players to actively use particular move 20 times rather than just having it in moveset, ensuring that Primeape experienced rage repeatedly before anger literally killed it and transformed it into Ghost and Fighting type, whose evolution resulted from dying from fury that accumulated through repeated use of move embodying rage that eventually proved lethal to Fighting type that became Ghost through terminal anger. Fact 31. Nosepass evolves into Probopass using same magnetic field requirement that Magneton uses for evolving, suggesting that these unrelated species share sensitivity to magnetism that triggers their evolutions. The parallel requirements create question about whether magnetic sensitivity is a common trait among steel types, or whether these specific species evolved similar responses to magnetic environments through convergent evolution where unrelated lineages independently developed magnetism-triggered transformations through adapting to similar ecological niches where magnetic fields provided evolutionary advantages that both species exploited despite having different ancestries and different original evolutionary paths. Fact 32. Gimmighoul evolves into Coldengo only after collecting 999 Gimmighoul coins, creating evolution requiring most extensive collection grind in franchise history. This requirement forced players to catch or to battle hundreds of Gimmighoul, or to methodically collect coins from overworld spawns before accumulating enough currency to trigger evolution that Gimmighoul's lore describes as transforming it from impoverished ghost into wealthy golden form that prosperity unlocks after sufficient treasure accumulates, making evolution thematically appropriate but mechanically tedious for players spending hours gathering coins one at a time from various sources throughout game world. Fact 33. Some Pokémon only evolve when traded to specific NPCs rather than to other players, with Alolan Graveler, Machoke, Kadabra, and Haunter in Pokémon Legends. Arceus evolving through NPC trades or through using Link Cable item. This addressed long-standing complaint that trade evolutions required other players or required owning two systems, finally providing solo players with methods for obtaining trade evolutions without external assistance or without complicated workarounds involving trading to second system and trading back, acknowledging that not all players had access to trading partners or wanted to depend on others for completing Pokédex. Fact 34. Milcery evolves into alchemy with 63 different possible forms depending on which suite it holds, which direction player spins, how long spinning lasts, and what time of day spinning occurs. This created most complex evolution in franchise, with form determined by multiple variables, producing different cream colors, different suite decorations, and different overall appearances that collectors wanted to obtain despite requiring extensive experimentation with timing, duration, and items to discover all possible alchemy variants that single Milcery species could evolve into through different spinning methods and different held suites. Fact 35. Stantler evolves into Wordeer only in Pokémon Legends. Arceus, after using Psyshield Bash in Agile style 20 times, creating what evolution exclusive to single game and requiring specific battle style unique to that game's mechanics. This made Wordeer unavailable in main series games at introduction, creating situation where evolution existed but couldn't be performed in standard games, lacking agile style mechanic that Legends introduced as temporary battle system that subsequent generations didn't retain, leaving Wordeer as evolution that most players couldn't achieve without playing Legends or without trading for specimens that others evolved in that game. Fact 36. Ursaring evolves into Ursaluna only during full moons when given Peat Block item in Pokémon Legends. Arceus, creating time-based evolution requiring specific item and specific lunar phase. This astronomical requirement suggested that Ursaring's biology responds to lunar cycles in ways that normal nights don't trigger, making full moon essential catalyst for transformation that Peat Block enables, but that cannot occur during other moon phases regardless of whether player provides item, creating evolution window that players needed to time correctly or wait for next month's full moon if they missed opportunity during previous cycle. Fact 37. Basculin evolves into Basculegion after taking at least 294 recoil damage without fainting in Pokémon Legends. Arceus, requiring use of recoil moves like Wave Crash or Double Edge. This damage threshold evolution reflected lore about Basculegion forming when Basculin survived while school members died, with recoil damage representing casualties that strengthened survivor through absorbing fallen comrades' spirits that possessed surviving Basculin and transformed it into ghost and water type, empowered by rage and sorrow of dead. Fish, whose energy elevated lone survivor to legendary status through tragedy and loss. Fact 38. Scyther evolves into different forms depending on items used. Metal Coat creates Scizor, while Black Augurite creates Clavor, demonstrating that single species can branch into multiple evolutions through different catalysts. These parallel evolutions suggest that Scyther's biology is particularly adaptable and that different minerals trigger different transformations, with steel creating Bug and Steel-type Scizor, while volcanic glass creates Bug and Rock-type Cleavor, whose abilities and appearance reflect which material influenced evolution that directed Scyther's development toward one specialization versus alternative path that different item would have produced through different chemical or energy properties affecting metamorphosis. Fact 39. Hisuian Quillfish evolves into Overquill after using Barb Barrage in strong style 20 times in Pokémon Legends. Arceus, creating another evolution requiring specific move usage with specific battle style. This made Overquill exclusive to Legends initially, though later games added alternative evolution methods that didn't require strong style when importing mechanic to games lacking that battle system, demonstrating how Game Freak adapts evolution requirements when transferring Pokémon between games with different mechanics that original evolution depended on, but that new games don't implement. Fact 40. Diplin evolves from Applin using syrupy apple item exclusive to Kitakami region in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet DLC, creating evolution requiring specific regional item that base games didn't include. This made Diplin unobtainable without DLC access, continuing tradition of DLC exclusive evolutions that encouraged players to purchase additional content to complete their living Pokédexes, including all evolutionary forms that species could achieve through items or methods that only 10DS expansion content provided through new areas, new NPCs, or new items that base games intentionally lacked to reserve content for paid expansions. Fact 41. Duraludon evolves into Archaludon using metal alloy item in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet DLC, demonstrating that pseudo-legendary Pokémon could receive additional evolutions in later generations beyond their original 3-stage lines. This evolution surprised players who assumed that pseudo-legendary's evolutionary lines were complete, establishing precedent that even fully evolved Pokémon with 600 base stat totals could receive further evolutions if Game Freak decided to extend lines that had previously been considered finished, opening possibilities for other pseudo-legendaries to receive similar treatment in future generations that might expand supposedly complete evolutionary families. Fact 42. Poltergeist evolves into Sinistcha, using Unremarkable Teacup or Masterpiece Teacup, depending on which form of Poltergeist is evolving, creating parallel evolution, requiring matching item rarity. This ensured that counterfeit Poltergeist couldn't evolve into authentic Sinistcha, and vice versa, maintaining form consistency across evolution and requiring players to obtain matching teacup items for whichever Poltergeist form they possessed, creating collection challenge where obtaining both Sinistcha forms required finding both Poltergeist forms and both teacup items that served as appropriate evolution catalysts for respective variants. Fact 43. Some regional forms have different evolution requirements than original forms, with Alolan Cubone evolving into Alolan Marowak starting at level 28 at night, while regular Cubone evolves into regular Marowak at level 28 regardless of time. This time requirement for Alolan evolution suggested that environmental factors affected not just appearance but also evolution conditions, with Alola's unique properties creating fire and ghost-type Marowak through night evolution that didn't occur in other regions where Cubone evolved into ground-type Marowak without time restrictions affecting when transformation could occur. Fact 44. Galarian Linoone evolves into Obstagoon starting at level 35 at night, giving 3-stage line to species that previously had only 2 stages, and demonstrating that regional variants could gain additional evolutions that original forms lacked. This established that regional variants weren't just alternate appearances but could represent different evolutionary potential, with environmental adaptation unlocking transformations that original species couldn't achieve because their development paths had diverged when populations separated and adapted to different regions with different selective pressures, favoring different traits and different final forms. Fact 45. Sirfetch'd evolved from Galarian Farfetch'd only after landing 3 critical hits in single battle, creating evolution requiring performance achievement rather than just experience accumulation. This skill-based requirement reflected Sirfetch'd's identity as honorable knight who earned evolution through demonstrating combat proficiency, making evolution feel more meaningful because player skill and luck determined success rather than evolution occurring automatically at specific level, creating satisfaction when players finally achieved 3 critical hits, allowing Farfetch to evolve after battles where critical hits didn't occur frequently enough to meet requirement within single encounter. And so concludes the first part of our evolution facts journey, having explored stone evolutions, trade evolutions, friendship evolutions, location requirements, move requirements, and bizarre conditional evolutions that make Pokémon transformation systems endlessly complex and fascinating. Rest now if sleep calls, or continue to part 2 where we'll discover more about evolution stones, mega evolution, regional variants, and the biological mysteries that evolution presents when examined carefully rather than accepted as game mechanics requiring no explanation. Sleep gently, dear friends, and may your dreams be filled with light of evolution's transformative glow. Welcome back, dear friends, to our continuing exploration of Pokémon evolution facts. In this second part, we'll delve deeper into evolution stones and their mysterious properties, explore Mega Evolution's temporary transformations that pushed Pokémon beyond their normal limits, examine regional variants whose evolutions differ from their original counterparts, and discover special evolutionary cases that defy standard categories through unique requirements or unusual outcomes. So settle back comfortably, close your eyes when sleep beckons, and let us continue this gentle journey through evolution's many forms and the remarkable ways that Pokémon transform from one state to another through processes both mundane and miraculous. Fact 46. Firestones were originally found in Cinnabar Island's Pokémon Mansion and at abandoned lab on Route 9, creating scarcity that made players choose carefully which fire type to evolve when only 1 or 2 stones existed per playthrough. Vulpix, Growlithe, and Eevee all wanted firestones, forcing decisions about which species deserved scarce resource that couldn't satisfy all candidates simultaneously, teaching players about opportunity costs and about permanence of choices in games that didn't allow easy stone acquisition through unlimited purchasing or through renewable sources that later generations introduced to reduce evolution. Item scarcity. Fact 47. Water stones could evolve 5 different species in generation I Poliwhirl, Shelder, Staryu, Eevee, and eventually Lombre and Panpour in later generations, making it the most versatile evolution stone, serving multiple evolutionary lines across different Pokémon types and families. This versatility made water stones valuable despite being slightly more common than other stones, with players needing multiple stones to evolve all candidates who required aquatic minerals properties for triggering transformations that leveling alone couldn't accomplish, regardless of how much experience these Pokémon gained through battles that provided levels but not evolutionary catalysts. Fact 48. Thunderstones were extremely rare in early games with only 1 available in Vermilion City, creating frustration for players wanting both Raichu and Magneton, who competed for single stone that couldn't serve both. This scarcity was addressed in later games through wild Pokémon holding stones or through infinite purchase options at department stores, acknowledging that excessive scarcity created frustration rather than meaningful choice when players simply wanted to experience content that artificial limitations prevented them from accessing without trading or without restarting games to make different stone allocation decisions during subsequent playthroughs. Fact 49. Leaf stones evolve grass types like gloom, weepinbell, and exegcute into their final forms, with the botanical stone apparently containing concentrated plant energy or growth hormones that trigger rapid maturation in species whose biology responds to phytochemical compounds that stones concentrate from environments where they naturally form. The stone's green coloring and its exclusive use on grass types suggests specificity, where chemical or energy signature only affects plant-based Pokémon, whose cellular structure recognizes stone's properties as evolution trigger that other types ignore because their biology doesn't interface with botanical energies that leaf stones emit. Fact 50. Moonstones are described as being as black as the night sky in some Pokédex entries, despite appearing blue or purple in games, creating inconsistency between item descriptions and visual representations that players see in inventories. The lunar stone's mysterious properties trigger evolutions in Clefairy, Jigglypuff, Nidorina, Nidorino, and later in Muna and Skitty, suggesting that these species share biological connection to lunar cycles or to cosmic radiation that Moon reflects toward Earth, making them sensitive to concentrated lunar essence that stones somehow capture and store for triggering evolutionary transformations. Fact 51. Sunstones weren't introduced until Generation 2, despite moonstones existing from Generation 1, creating asymmetry where lunar evolution item preceded solar counterpart by several years. Sunstones evolve gloom into blossom, sunkern into sunflora, and eventually cottony and petilil into their final forms, serving species whose biology apparently requires solar radiation, concentration for evolution. That natural sunlight exposure doesn't provide in sufficient intensity or in correct wavelength distribution that evolution requires for triggering metamorphosis that occurs only when exposed to processed solar energy that stones somehow refine from raw sunlight. Fact 52. Shiny stones were introduced in Generation 4 for evolving Togetic, Roselia, and later Floette and Minccino, creating evolutionary catalyst, whose properties remain mysterious given that shiny doesn't obviously correspond to element or energy type like fire, water, thunder, or leaf clearly reference. The stone's sparkly appearance suggests purity or radiance, perhaps indicating that affected species require refined energy or heightened beauty for evolution that mundane experience cannot provide, making shiny stone evolution marker of achieving perfection or refinement that ordinary development through leveling doesn't accomplish for species with aristocratic or aesthetic evolutionary themes. Fact 53. Dusk stones evolve Pokémon associated with darkness or night like Murkrow into Honchkrow and Misdreavus into Mismagius, creating twilight-themed evolutionary catalyst serving species whose powers strengthen during evening hours or whose biology depends on absence of light. The stone's dark purple coloring and its exclusive use on dark or ghost types suggests that it concentrates nocturnal energies or shadow essence that these species require for maturation that cannot occur during daylight or through normal leveling that doesn't provide concentrated darkness that dusk stones somehow capture and transfer during evolution. Fact 54. Dawn stones have gender-specific usage with male Curlia evolving into Gallid and female Snorunt evolving into Frostlass, making Dawnstone unique among evolution stones for caring about users' gender rather than just species. This suggests that Dawnstone's properties interact with sexual characteristics in ways that other stones don't, perhaps because Dawn represents new beginnings and transformation, appropriate for species whose male and female members develop so differently that their evolutionary paths completely diverge rather than producing sexual dimorphism within. Single species, like most Pokemon families that show gender differences, maintain. Fact 55. Ice stones were added in Generation 7 for evolving Alolan Sandshrew and Alolan Vulpix into their ice-type forms, creating elemental stone that other regions' versions of these species couldn't use because only Alolan variants possessed ice-type biology responding to frozen minerals' properties. Regular Sandshrew and Vulpix continued using other evolution methods despite their Alolan counterparts requiring ice stones, demonstrating that regional adaptation changed not just appearance and typing, but fundamental biology, determining what evolutionary catalyst species responded to when exposed to items that one variant recognized while other variant ignored. Fact 56. Mega Evolution was introduced in Generation VI, allowing fully evolved Pokemon to temporarily transform during battle into more powerful forms, using Mega Stones specific to each species, combined with Keystone that trainers possessed. This mechanic created temporary evolution beyond permanent transformations, with mega-evolved forms reverting after battle rather than remaining permanently changed like normal evolution produced, suggesting that mega evolution pushed Pokemon beyond stable biological limits into enhanced states that they couldn't sustain indefinitely without damage or exhaustion that temporary transformation prevented by automatically reverting when battles ended. Fact 57. Charizard received two different Mega Evolutions, Mega Charizard X becoming Fire and Dragon type, while Mega Charizard Y remained Fire and Flying type, with different stat distributions and abilities. This dual Mega Evolution created precedent that some Pokemon could have multiple Mega forms accessed through different Mega Stones, with Charizard X and Charizard Y representing alternative enhancement paths that emphasized physical versus special attacks, demonstrating that Mega Evolution wasn't single predetermined transformation, but could branch into variants, emphasizing different aspects of base Pokemon's potential that different stones unlocked through different resonance patterns. Fact 58. Mewtwo also received two Mega forms with Mega Mewtwo X, gaining Fighting type and increased physical attack, while Mega Mewtwo Y remained pure Psychic, with even higher special attack reaching base 194 highest special attack stat. In franchise at time of introduction, these alternative Mega Evolutions allowed Mewtwo to specialize as physical or special attacker depending on which Mega Stone was used, creating versatility where opponents couldn't predict whether they faced physically oriented or specially oriented Mewtwo until Mega Evolution revealed which stone was equipped and which stat distribution opponent needed to handle during battle. Fact 59. Rayquaza Mega evolves without requiring Mega Stone, instead needing only to know Dragon Ascent move and to be commanded to Mega Evolve during battle. This unique Mega Evolution method freed Rayquaza's item slot for Life Orb or Choice Band, while still accessing Mega Form, creating balance concerns where Mega Rayquaza's flexibility and power exceeded what other Mega Evolved Pokemon achieved, leading to its ban even from Uber's tier where other banned Pokémon competed, creating Anything Goes tier specifically for accommodating Mega Rayquaza's overwhelming strength that no conventional competitive format could balance. Fact 60. Mega evolution causes pain to some Pokémon according to Pokédex entries, with Mega Aerodactyl suffering from transformation that strains its body, and with Mega Glalie jaw becoming dislocated by transformation, freezing it solid. These disturbing details suggested that Mega Evolution wasn't benign power-up but potentially cruel process that trainers inflicted on Pokémon for competitive advantage, without considering suffering that transformations caused to partners who endured pain for trainer benefit, creating ethical questions about whether pursuing power justified, causing harm to creatures who couldn't consent to transformations that humans forced upon them. Fact 61. Mega Kangaskhan's entry describes the baby in her pouch growing and leaving pouch to fight alongside mother during Mega Evolution, but entry contradicts visual evidence, showing baby remaining in pouch while simply becoming more animated. This inconsistency between Pokédex text and observable reality created confusion about whether baby actually exited pouch or whether entry simply described baby's increased participation in battles without literal departure from privation. Mother's pouch, that served as baby's safe space, even during transformations that enhanced both parent and child simultaneously through shared mega evolution, affecting family unit rather than just individual. Fact 62. Mega Mawile's second mouth splits into two massive jaws during transformation, creating 3 total mouths, 1 small mouth on face, and 2 gigantic steel jaws extending from head. This transformation increased Mawile's attack stat dramatically, while giving it huge power ability that doubled attack again, making Mega Mawile one of strongest physical attackers in game despite its small size and cute appearance that belied devastating offensive capabilities, that made it centralizing threat in formats where Mega Evolution was legal and where Mega Mawile's power forced teams to carry specific counters or risk being swept by deceptively dangerous Fairy and Steel type. Fact 63. Primal Reversion is technically not Mega Evolution despite appearing similar, with Groudon and Kyogre accessing primal forms through Red Orb and Blue Orb rather than through Mega Stones. This distinction suggested that Primal Reversion represented return to ancient power rather than exceeding normal limits like Mega Evolution did, with primal forms being original states that these legendary Pokémon possessed in ancient times before entering dormancy, that reduced them to lesser forms, that Primal Reversion temporarily restored when orbs provided energy allowing legendaries to reclaim full power that history had diminished. Fact 64. Ultra Burst allowed Necrozma to transform into Ultra Necrozma after fusing with Solgaleo or Lunala, and then activating Burst during battle using Ultra Necrozium Z Crystal. This transformation achieved through Z-Move mechanic rather than through Mega Evolution represented alternative enhancement system unique to Necrozma, whose multiple forms and transformation methods created complexity, where single Pokémon had base form, 2 fusion forms, and ultimate Ultra Burst form accessed through specific sequence requiring fusion item, Z Crystal, and battle command that triggered burst transforming fusion form into ultimate state exceeding even Mega Evolution's power. Fact 65. Eternamax. Eternatus is Eternatus's transformation achieved during story battle in Pokémon Sword and Shield, but form cannot be accessed in normal gameplay outside that scripted encounter, With base stat total of 1,125, Eternamax form is statistically most powerful Pokémon in franchise, but its restriction to single-story battle prevented it from being actually usable in ways that would break competitive balance if players could access form that made even Mega Rayquaza seem weak by comparison, demonstrating that some transformations exist purely for narrative purposes rather than as genuine gameplay options. Fact 66. Ash Greninja was unique transformation exclusive to specific Greninja from Sun and Moon demo that transformed during battle when defeating opponents, creating form with increased stats and altered appearance. This transformation wasn't Mega Evolution or Z-Move, but separate mechanic called Battle Bond that other Greninja couldn't access, creating exclusive form that only particular event Greninja possessed, through ability that regular Greninja of same species lacked, making Ash Greninja collectible form rather than standard evolution or transformation that players could achieve with any Greninja through normal training or items. Fact 67. Wishy-Washy has school form transformation that occurs when its HP is above 25% and it reaches level 20, creating temporary form change during battle as stat-based transformation rather than evolution. School form dramatically increases all stats by assembling hundreds of individual Wishy-Washy into massive school that appears as single large Pokémon, but form breaks apart when HP drops below quarter health, reverting to solo form that's vulnerable and weak until HP recovers above threshold, allowing reformation of school that grants power through numbers rather than through individual strength that solo form lacks. Fact 68. Zygarde has multiple forms achieved by collecting cells and cores scattered throughout Alola region, with 10% form resembling dog, 50% form resembling serpent, and complete form resembling humanoid mecha. These forms aren't evolutions but assembly stages, where gathering more of Zygarde's distributed components created more powerful configurations, suggesting that Zygarde exists as distributed organism whose full power requires collecting most or all of its separated pieces that individually lack strength, but that collectively create legendary Pokémon, capable of maintaining ecosystem balance that its role requires when assembled completely. Fact 69. Cherrim transforms between overcast and sunshine forms depending on weather, with harsh sunlight causing Cherrim to open its petals, revealing brighter coloring, while other weather keeps it closed in overcast form. This weather-dependent transformation demonstrated that some form changes respond to environmental conditions rather than to permanent evolution or to conscious transformation, with Cherrim's flowers automatically opening in sunlight through biological response similar to real plants that track sun's movement or that open and close based on light availability, making Cherrim's transformation more botanical reflex than deliberate metamorphosis. Fact 70. Cast form changes forms, matching weather conditions with sunny form in harsh sunlight, rainy form in rain, and snowy form in hail, while reverting to normal form in clear weather. This weather-reactive Pokémon was designed to demonstrate weather mechanics in Generation 3 that introduced weather effects as major strategic element, with cast forms serving as mascot for system by embodying different weather types through transformations that changed its typing and appearance to match current conditions, making it living demonstration of weather's influence, even if competitive viability didn't match the creative design showcasing environmental responsiveness. Fact 71. Arceus changes type to match held plate, creating 18 possible forms corresponding to each type that plate items represent. This type flexibility makes Arceus extraordinarily versatile as creator deity that can embody any type depending on which aspect of creation it chooses to emphasize through plate selection, with multi-type ability preventing type from being changed through other means and ensuring that plate determines typing regardless of moves like soak or abilities like normalize that would normally override natural typing if not for multi-types protection, maintaining chosen type throughout battle. Fact 72. Silvally was designed as artificial Arceus, created by combining traits from multiple Pokémon types, with type Null's helmet restricting its power until evolution unlocked full potential as Silvally, whose Arceus system ability mimics Arceus's multi-type by changing Silvally's type to match held memory. This artificial legendary represents humanity's attempt to recreate divine Pokémon through science and genetic engineering, creating synthetic type changer that approaches but doesn't equal Arceus's power, demonstrating limits of human capability while achieving remarkable success. Considering that Silvally functions similarly to God, it was designed to replicate despite being manufactured rather than primordial. Fact 73. Rotom has 5 appliance forms, achieved by possessing different household electronics in specific locations, where appliances are stored, with each form gaining secondary typing matching appliance function. Heat Rotom becoming fire type through oven possession, Wash Rotom becoming water type through washing machine possession, and so forth. These possessions aren't permanent evolution but temporary inhabitations that Rotom can freely change by possessing different appliances, creating flexibility where single Rotom can become multiple types through changing which object it possesses rather than being locked into single form through irreversible evolution that permanent transformation would create. Fact 74. Giratina switches between altered forme and origin forme, depending on whether it's in Distortion World or holding Greasious Orb in Normal World, changing from Ghost and Dragon type with legs into more serpentine form with different stat distribution, emphasizing offensive power over bulk. This forme change reflects Giratina's adaptation to different dimensional physics, with origin forme being true form that Distortion World's altered physics support, while altered forme represents constrained version that normal dimension forces Giratina to adopt when existing in reality, where its full power cannot properly manifest without dimensional anchor that Greasious Orb provides. Fact 75. Shaman transforms between land form and sky form when exposed to Grassidea flower during daytime, gaining flying type and increased speed that makes sky form competitively viable in ways that land form stats don't support. However, sky form reverts to land form at night or when frozen, creating temporary transformation with time restrictions and status vulnerabilities that prevent sky form from being permanent state, suggesting that Gracedia's effects require daylight and active metabolism to maintain transformation that night, or frozen status interrupts by denying conditions necessary for sustaining sky form's enhanced state. Fact 76. Hoopa switches between confined and unbound forms using prison bottle item that temporarily releases seals, restraining Hoopa's true power, transforming it from psychic and ghost type into psychic and dark type with dramatically increased attack. Unbound form lasts only 3 days in-game or until boxed, after which Hoopa reverts to confined form that must use prison bottle again to access unbound transformation, suggesting that seals automatically reassert themselves after brief window where Hoopa's full destructive power can manifest before containment systems force it back into restricted state that protects world from chaos that unrestricted Hoopa would cause. Fact 77. Meloetta changes between aria forme and pirouette form using relic song move during battle, switching from psychic and normal type to psychic and fighting type, with transformed stats emphasizing attack over special attack. This in-battle transformation creates versatility, where Meloetta can adapt to matchups by changing forme mid-battle, though forme reverts when switched out, making transformation tactical decision about whether physical or special sets better handle current opponent, while accepting that switching removes transformation, requiring another relic song use after returning to battle if pirouette forme is still desired for current situation. Fact 78. Aegislash shifts between shield form and blade form, using King's Shield and attacking moves respectively, creating defensive and offensive stances that change stat distribution dramatically between high defenses with low offenses versus high offenses with low defenses. This stance system creates mind games where opponents must predict whether Aegislash will attack or defend, while Aegislash players must carefully manage stance changes to avoid being caught in wrong forme at wrong time when defensive forme's weak offenses can't threaten opponents, or when offensive forme's poor defenses cannot survive enemy attacks that would have been tankable in shield forme. Fact 79. Darmanitan switches between standard mode and Zen mode when HP drops below half, while having Zen mode ability, transforming from pure fire type into fire and psychic type with completely inverted stats that exchange attack for special attack. This automatic transformation triggers without player control when damage threshold is reached, forcing Darmanitan into different role mid-battle that might not suit team's needs at that moment, but that potentially saves Darmanitan from fainting by providing different defensive profile and different offensive options that might handle opponents better than standard mode's physical attacking approach that wasn't succeeding before transformation triggered. Fact 80. Galarian Darmanitan's Zen mode transforms it from fire and ice type into pure fire type, while maintaining physical orientation instead of switching to special attacks like regular Darmanitan does, demonstrating that regional variants can have completely different abilities and transformation effects than original forms possessed. Galarian Zen mode preserves Darmanitan's role as physical attacker while changing typing and slightly redistributing stats, creating regional variant whose transformation serves different purpose than original's transformation, despite sharing ability name and sharing general concept of changing in response to damage threshold being crossed. Fact 81. Mimikyu's disguise ability functions like one-time form change, where taking hit breaks disguise revealing drooped head underneath, while negating damage from attack that broke disguise, creating protective forme change that prevents first hit from dealing damage, while permanently altering Mimikyu's appearance for remainder of battle. This ability-based transformation isn't reversible during battle, unlike most form changes that can switch back and forth, making disguise one-time protection that's expended after blocking single attack, demonstrating that form changes can be permanent within battle, even when they're not permanent across separate battle instances where disguise regenerates between encounters. Fact 82. Morpeko switches between full belly mode and hangry mode each turn through hunger switch ability, alternating between electric and dark typing while changing aura wheel moves type to match current form. This automatic turn-by-turn transformation creates rhythm, where Morpeko alternates types predictably, allowing opponents to anticipate which type they'll face on each turn, while forcing Morpeko to work with whichever Form A is active, rather than choosing transformations strategically, creating mechanical simplicity where hunger-driven mood swings occur like clockwork, regardless of battle circumstances that normally would influence which Form A would be tactically preferable. Fact 83. Cramorant's Gulp Missile ability causes it to catch fish in its mouth after using Surf or Dive, changing form to show Arrokuda or Pikachu in throat, depending on current HP. This Form A change creates counterattack, where taking damage causes Cramorant to spit, caught prey at attacker, dealing damage, and potentially causing paralysis if Pikachu is spat, creating bizarre transformation where Cramorant's appearance changes to reflect stomach contents that become weapons when Cramorant is struck, making feeding behavior double as defensive mechanism activated automatically when specific moves are used successfully. Fact 84. Ice-Q's Ice Face ability functions like Mimikyu's Disguise, but with weather-dependent restoration, with hail or snow regenerating broken ice head, while sun accelerates melting. This creates Form A that can be lost and regained within single battle depending on weather conditions, making Ice-Q's defensive form more dynamic than Mimikyu's one-time disguise that never returns once broken, demonstrating that ability-based form changes can have different restoration mechanics, creating varied strategic implications where some forms regenerate while others remain changed permanently after initial transformation regardless of how long battle continues. Fact 85. Palafin transforms into hero form after switching out and returning to battle when possessing 0 to hero ability, dramatically increasing all stats while changing appearance from adorable dolphin into muscular superhero dolphin. This transformation requires switching, creating turn cost where hero form isn't immediately available when Palafin enters battle initially, but requires leaving and returning to trigger transformation, balancing hero form's incredible stats against tempo loss from switching twice to access powered-up state that makes Palafin competitively threatening despite awkward activation requirement that opponents can potentially exploit during turns when Palafin is switching to activate transformation. Fact 86. Ogerpon has 4 mask forms equipped through held items representing different terrestrial types, with each mask providing different type combination and different abilities, while preventing Ogerpon from holding other items, since masks occupy item slot. These Form A choices create permanent decision before battle about which mask Ogerpon wears, since items cannot be changed mid-battle, making mask selection team-building decision rather than in-battle tactical choice, creating 4 distinct Ogerpon variants that function almost as different Pokémon depending on which mask is selected for particular battle format or matchup that specific masks, typing, and ability best address. Fact 87. Terrapagos has 3 forms with normal form available initially, terrestrial form achieved through terrestrializing, and stellar form exclusive to specific story battle where Terrapagos achieves ultimate power. This 3-stage transformation system creates legendary Pokémon with multiple power levels accessed through different mechanics, with terrestrial form available in normal gameplay, while stellar form remains restricted to scripted encounter similarly to Eternamax Eternatus, preventing most powerful form from being generally accessible in ways that would create balance issues if players could use Stellar Terrapagos in competitive battles or during regular gameplay. Fact 88. Form changes can be permanent or temporary depending on species, with permanent changes like Rotom's appliance forms persisting until deliberately changed, while temporary changes like Darmanitan's Zen mode reverting automatically when triggering conditions end. This creates spectrum from irreversible evolutions that cannot be undone, through reversible form changes that can be switched freely through completely automatic transformations that occur based on conditions rather than player choice, demonstrating variety in how Pokemon metamorphosis functions across different species, with different biological or mechanical reasons for changing forms, temporarily versus permanently versus conditionally. Fact 89. Some evolution items like Razor Claw and Razor Fang are held items that trigger evolution when Pokemon levels up while holding them at specific times, with Razor Claw evolving Sneasel at night and Razor Fang evolving Gligar at night. This created evolution category requiring both item and timing, similar to how friendship evolution sometimes requires time of day, adding complexity, where players needed to remember not just to equip item, but to level up during correct time window, or wait for next appropriate period if leveling occurred at wrong time. That doesn't satisfy temporal requirement that item-based evolution imposes alongside item possession requirement. Fact 90. Deep Sea Scale and Deep Sea Tooth are item-based trade evolutions for Clamperl that function differently from most held items because they only trigger evolution during trading rather than during level up while holding item. This makes Clamperl's evolution require both specific item and specific trading partner or multiple trading sequences to obtain both Huntail and Gorbis, creating collection challenge where completing evolutionary line requires more resources and coordination than simple single trade evolutions. Demand from players who need to acquire both items and perform both trades to add both of Clamperl's possible evolutions to their Pokédex entries. And so concludes the second part of our evolution facts journey, having explored Evolution Stone's properties and scarcity, Mega Evolution's temporary transformations and their sometimes painful costs, form changes both temporary and permanent, and the various special cases where evolution or transformation follows unusual rules, requiring specific conditions that standard leveling doesn't address. Rest now if sleep calls, or continue to part 3 where we'll discover more about evolution's biological mysteries, its unexplained mechanisms, regional variants, and the final fascinating facts about how Pokémon transform. Sleep gently, dear friends, and may evolution's light illuminate your peaceful dreams. Welcome back, dear friends, to the final part of our comprehensive journey through Pokémon evolution. Facts. In this concluding section, we'll explore evolution's biological mysteries that science cannot fully explain, examine paradoxes and contradictions in evolutionary lore, discover strange evolutionary relationships between seemingly unrelated species, investigate evolution's role in competitive play and game balance, and conclude with fascinating facts about the most unusual and remarkable transformations in the franchise's history. So settle back one final time, close your eyes whenever sleep beckons, and let us complete this gentle exploration of evolution's wonders that have captivated trainers for nearly 3 decades across generations of games and creatures. Fact 91. Evolution sometimes decreases a Pokemon's size despite generally increasing dimensions, with Gloom being taller than Blossom and Dragonair being longer than Dragonite, creating paradoxes where evolution makes creatures smaller. These size reductions suggest that evolution isn't purely about growth, but sometimes involves condensing mass into more efficient configurations or adopting body plans better suited for species' ecological niche than previous forms possessed, making evolution about optimization rather than simple enlargement that most evolutionary lines demonstrate through increasing heights and weights as base forms mature into evolved forms. Fact 92. Pokémon retain memories and personality after evolution, according to anime and manga depictions, where evolved Pokémon recognize former trainers and maintain relationships from pre-evolution existence. This suggests that consciousness and identity persist through transformation despite dramatic physical changes that might theoretically damage brain structures if evolution occurred through normal biological processes rather than through whatever supernatural or sci-fi mechanisms actually enable instant metamorphosis that Pokémon undergo when evolving from one form into another without gradual transitions that real-world metamorphosis requires through larval and pupal stages preceding adult emergence. Fact 93. Evolution can be reversed through special means in side games and anime, with de-evolution occurring when certain conditions are met or when technology forces Pokémon back into previous forms. However, main series games never allow de-evolution outside of form changes that aren't true evolution. Maintaining that evolution is permanent transformation that cannot be undone once Pokémon crosses threshold into new form through leveling, stones, trading, or other triggers that initiate metamorphosis, carrying creatures forward into new existence, from which return to previous state becomes impossible regardless of trainer preference or Pokémon desire. Fact 94. Baby Pokémon cannot breed, despite being capable of evolving into adult forms that can reproduce, creating biological paradox where pre-evolutions of breedable species lack reproductive capability that their evolved forms possess. This suggests that baby Pokémon are sexually immature, even though they can battle and gain experience, leading to evolution, making them juveniles capable of combat and growth, but incapable of reproduction until evolution triggers maturation that unlocks breeding capability, alongside other changes that evolution produces through transforming juveniles into reproductively viable adults capable of producing eggs when paired with compatible partners. Fact 95. Fossil Pokémon can evolve despite being extinct species revived from ancient DNA, suggesting that their evolutionary pathways still function even though their species haven't existed for millions of years, during which evolutionary pressures should have eliminated extinct forms that no longer existed in environments where natural selection could act. The fact that revived fossils retain ability to evolve implies that evolution is intrinsic biological program encoded in genetics, rather than being response to environmental pressures, allowing ancient species to complete developmental stages that extinction interrupted before most specimens could achieve final forms. Fact 96. Cross-generational evolutions added pre-evolutions or evolutions to existing Pokémon families years after original species debuted, with Pichu added as Pikachu's pre-evolution in Generation 2 and Licky Licky added as Lickitung's evolution in Generation 4. These retroactive additions to evolutionary lines demonstrated that Game Freak viewed Pokémon families as incomplete and expandable rather than as fixed entities whose evolutionary stages were determined at initial design, allowing future generations to flesh out families that seemed underdeveloped or that could benefit from additional stages, providing gameplay variety or addressing competitive balance issues that complete lines with 3 stages possessed. Advantages over incomplete lines with only 1 or 2 stages. Fact 97. Split evolutions create branching paths, where single species can evolve into multiple different forms depending on conditions, with Eevee being most famous example, but with many species offering choices between 2 or more evolutionary outcomes based on stones, gender, stats, time, location, or other variables. These branches demonstrate that evolution isn't single, inevitable outcome, but represents potential that can be directed toward different final forms depending on environmental influences, training methods, or items that shape development along different trajectories, leading to distinct species that share ancestry but that diverge completely after evolution commits them to separate paths. Fact 98. Some evolution families are incomplete with middle stages existing but lacking either pre-evolution or final evolution, creating asymmetrical lines where development seems truncated compared to 3-stage families that feel more complete. Examples include Pokémon like Lovedisk, which seems like it should evolve but doesn't, or Dunsparce, which fans expected to evolve for years before finally receiving Dunsparce in Generation 9, after over 2 decades of being standalone Pokémon that seemed narratively designed to evolve, but which mechanically lacked evolutionary potential, until developers decided to complete what felt like incomplete evolutionary concept. Fact 99. Evolution sometimes changes Pokemon's personality, according to Pokedex entries, with gentle Cubone becoming aggressive, Marowak or playful Ipom becoming serious Ambipom, suggesting that transformation affects psychology and behavior alongside physical characteristics. These personality changes raise questions about identity and continuity when evolution not only alters appearance and abilities, but fundamentally changes who Pokémon are as individuals, making them different people inhabiting different bodies rather than same consciousness, wearing new form, creating philosophical questions about whether evolved Pokémon are same beings they were before, or whether they're successors to previous selves who died during transformation that created new entities from old forms. Fact 100. Everstone prevents evolution when held, allowing trainers to keep Pokémon in base forms indefinitely, regardless of level or other evolution triggers that would normally force transformation. This item acknowledges that not all trainers want evolution, and that some prefer base forms aesthetically or strategically, giving players agency to refuse evolution permanently, rather than requiring cancellation each time evolution attempts to trigger, though Everstone prevents all evolution, including beneficial transformations that players might want if they forget to remove stone before leveling Pokémon, past evolution thresholds that they wanted to trigger at specific levels for learning moves earlier. Fact 101. Level up evolution thresholds aren't arbitrary, but often correspond to meaningful gameplay moments like Charmander evolving at level 16 shortly before Misty's gym presents type disadvantage, or like Magikarp evolving at level 20 after lengthy period of being nearly useless in battle. These carefully chosen levels balance early evolution, giving players access to stronger forms against delaying evolution, allowing unevolved forms to learn moves that evolved forms cannot access, or that evolved forms learn much later, creating trade-offs where early evolution provides immediate power, while delayed evolution provides better move pool versatility that planning and patience reward with superior final product. Fact 102. Pokémon can reach level 100 without evolving if evolution is prevented, creating max-level base forms that never achieved potential transformations that experience would normally trigger. These prevented evolutions result in weaker Pokémon than evolved forms would be at same level due to lower base stats, but some players maintain unevolved teams as challenge runs, demonstrating that skill and strategy can compensate for statistical disadvantages that refusing evolution creates, making base form viable through clever play that overcomes limitations that evolved form's superior stats would eliminate through raw power that proper evolution provides to Pokémon allowed to transform naturally. Fact 103. Evolution during battle in anime creates dramatic moments where Pokémon transform mid-fight and immediately use new form's power to defeat opponents who were dominating before transformation. But games don't allow mid-battle evolution except through mega evolution or form changes. This divergence between media creates different evolution experiences where anime treats transformation as triumphant battle climax, while games treat evolution as between battle event that occurs after experience threshold is reached, maintaining mechanical clarity by preventing unexpected transformations during battles where evolution's stat changes could create unfair advantages if Pokémon could suddenly evolve when losing and use boosted stats to reverse disadvantageous situations. Fact 104. Shiny Pokémon retain their alternate coloration through evolution, with shiny base forms evolving into shiny evolved forms rather than reverting to normal colors. This consistency maintains prestige of finding rare color variants by ensuring that effort invested in obtaining or breeding shiny base forms isn't wasted when evolution occurs, allowing trainers to showcase rare specimens throughout evolutionary line rather than losing shininess at evolution and having to find new shiny of evolved form separately, which would make evolution disappointing rather than celebratory for trainers who valued base form's rare coloration that evolution preserves through transformation. Fact 105. Some evolution requirements were simplified in later generations compared to original methods, with Feebas no longer requiring beauty stat and instead evolving through prism scale trading, or with Inkay's upside-down requirement being adjusted for Switch, which doesn't have gyroscope in all play modes. These simplifications acknowledge that overly complex evolution methods create frustration and inaccessibility rather than rewarding challenge, balancing uniqueness against approachability so that players can experience content without consulting external guides or without accidentally discovering obscure requirements through trial and error that most players would never naturally attempt without hints, directing them toward unintuitive evolution triggers. Fact 106. Evolution doesn't heal Pokémon or restore HP, despite being dramatic transformation that might logically refresh health when body restructures itself completely during metamorphosis. This mechanical consistency prevents evolution from being used as healing tactic and maintains that evolution is growth milestone rather than tactical resource, avoiding situations where players deliberately prevented evolution to save it for emergency mid-battle healing if evolution restored a health the way it does in some other monster collecting games where transformation refreshes HP, creating strategic depth through timing evolution for maximum benefit rather than evolving immediately when possible. Fact 107. Pokémon that evolve through happiness can be evolved faster through various means, including keeping them in party, giving them vitamins, using them in battles, having them hold Soothe Bell, and walking with them. creating multiple paths toward friendship threshold that happiness-based evolutions require. These varied friendship-building methods accommodate different playstyles by allowing battling-focused players to evolve through combat, while allowing non-battling players to evolve through walking and items, ensuring that happiness evolutions remain accessible to players who prefer different approaches rather than mandating single method that might not suit everyone's preferred gameplay style or team composition. Fact 108. Evolution sometimes grants immunity to types that previously dealt super effective damage, with Swinub gaining Ice-type immunity through Thick Fat ability when evolving into Piloswine, or with Gliscor gaining Electric immunity by becoming Ground-type. These type changes or ability gains that evolution provides can completely alter matchups and viability by removing weaknesses that limited unevolved forms' usefulness, demonstrating that evolution's benefits include defensive improvements alongside offensive upgrades that stat increases provide, making evolution desirable both for becoming stronger and for becoming less vulnerable to attacks that threatened earlier forms, which evolution immunizes against through type or ability changes. Fact 109. Legendary Pokémon generally cannot evolve, with notable exceptions like Cosmog Line and Type Null Line. Maintaining that legendary status indicates completion and perfection that doesn't require further development. This design philosophy treats legendary Pokémon as already fully realized beings who emerged in their final forms, rather than as creatures who undergo development from weaker states to stronger states through gradual maturation that evolution represents for ordinary species whose strength grows through experience and bonds that legendary Pokémon apparently don't need because their power is inherent rather than developed through training. Fact 110. Evolution. Animation duration has decreased over generations, with lengthy sequences in early games being streamlined into quicker transformations in recent titles, balancing spectacle against convenience for players who evolve multiple Pokémon frequently and who might become frustrated by repeatedly watching extended animations. This evolution of evolution itself demonstrates how game design priorities shifted from emphasizing transformation's significance through lengthy dramatic sequences toward respecting player time by making frequent events occur quickly without sacrificing entirely the celebratory nature of evolution that shorter but still visually interesting animations preserve, while eliminating tedium that older games' unskippable evolution sequences created for experienced players. Fact 111. B-button cancellation exists specifically because playtesters requested ability to prevent evolution after developers initially intended for evolution to be mandatory once triggered, demonstrating that player choice and agency were prioritized even in early Pokémon design. This decision to allow evolution refusal acknowledged that trainers might have strategic or personal reasons for keeping Pokémon unevolved, and that forcing evolution would remove customization options that players valued, establishing precedent that Pokémon games would generally favor player freedom over enforcing developer-intended progression paths that might not align with individual player preferences about team composition or aesthetic choices. Fact 112. Evolution cannot be reversed in main series games, but spin-off titles like Pokémon Mystery Dungeon sometimes allow de-evolution through special items or plot events, creating alternate continuities where transformation isn't necessarily permanent. These spin-off mechanics explore possibilities that main series avoids by treating evolution as irreversible commitment, allowing spin-off games to experiment with mechanics that main series considers too disruptive to core gameplay loop, but that spin-off audiences might appreciate for strategic flexibility or narrative purposes, where temporarily de-evolving could serve story beats that permanent evolution would prevent from occurring naturally within game's plot structure. Fact 113. Evolution chains were sometimes planned differently during development, with scrapped evolutions or pre-evolutions discovered in game data, like Baby Vulpix that was planned but never implemented, or various evolution connections that were conceptualized but abandoned before release. These cut evolutions reveal that evolutionary families were fluid during design process, with developers considering many possibilities before settling on final forms and final evolutionary relationships that shipped in released games, suggesting that evolution lines we know could have been quite different if alternative design directions had been pursued during development phases, where nothing was finalized and everything remained negotiable. Fact 114. Parallel evolutions like Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan from Tyrogue, or the evolutions, suggest that single species can contain genetic potential for diverging into completely different body plans, depending on external influences during development. This biological flexibility exceeds what real-world evolution allows, where species body plans are relatively fixed and where dramatic variations don't emerge from identical starting forms through different developmental triggers, making Pokémon evolution more similar to plastic development seen in some insects or amphibians whose adult forms vary based on environmental conditions experienced during juvenile stages, but taken to extremes that real biology doesn't permit. Fact 115. Some Pokémon evolve by consuming items like evolutionary stones or evolutionary held items that disappear after evolution, raising questions about whether stones are physically incorporated into evolved forms, or whether they catalyze reactions and then dissipate during transformation. The permanent consumption of evolution stones suggests they provide material or energy that evolution requires, rather than just triggering intrinsic developmental programs, making stones actual fuel or building blocks for metamorphosis, rather than just keys unlocking potential that Pokémon already possessed internally without needing external material inputs that stones provide through unknown mechanisms when used on compatible species. Fact 116. Trade evolution exists in-universe as biological response to electromagnetic or energy exposure during transfer between devices, according to some interpretations, though games never explicitly explain why trading triggers evolution beyond mechanical necessity of encouraging social interaction. This lack of canonical explanation allows players to imagine various reasons why teleportation or data transfer might trigger metamorphosis, creating spaces for headcanon about whether trading involves radiation exposure, whether it provides energy input, whether it involves dimensional travel that affects Pokémon biology, or whether some other phenomenon occurs during trading that games don't elaborate on mechanically or narratively. Fact 117. Evolution is depicted differently across media, with manga sometimes showing painful transformations, while anime depicts evolution as generally positive experience, and games provide neutral presentation without addressing whether Pokémon experience pleasure or pain during transformation. These varying depictions create ambiguity about evolution's subjective experience, allowing different audiences to interpret metamorphosis as either beautiful ascension to greater form or as potentially traumatic restructuring of body and mind that games don't examine, because addressing suffering would complicate marketing of games toward children who shouldn't be worried that they're potentially hurting partners through encouraging evolution that might be uncomfortable or worse for Pokemon undergoing transformations. Fact 118. Evolution sometimes completely changes Pokemon's ecological role, with Remoraid evolving from fish into octopus octillery, or with Trapinch evolving from ground-dwelling antlion into flying Vibrava, and then into dragonfly Flygon. These dramatic ecological shifts suggest that evolution isn't just about becoming stronger version of same creature, but sometimes involves complete lifestyle and habitat changes that transform burrowing larvae into aerial adults. Through metamorphosis, more extreme than even real insects experience when aquatic larvae become terrestrial or aerial adults, through complete metabolic restructuring that insect metamorphosis accomplishes, but that Pokemon evolution achieves instantly rather than through pupal stages that real metamorphosis requires. Fact 119. Holding Everstone while breeding passes down nature to offspring more reliably, creating dual purpose where item both prevents evolution and influences breeding outcomes, demonstrating that evolution stones and related items have properties beyond just triggering or preventing transformation. This breeding interaction suggests that Everstone contains properties that stabilize certain biological traits in addition to preventing metamorphosis, making it preservation item, maintaining status quo, whether that means keeping Pokemon unevolved or ensuring offspring inherit specific personality characteristics that nature represents mechanically, creating thematic consistency where Everstone preserves and maintains against change, whether that change is evolution or genetic variation between generations. Fact 120. Some evolution methods like Milcery's spinning requirement acknowledge player physical interaction with game in ways that earlier generations couldn't implement due to hardware limitations, demonstrating how evolution mechanics evolved alongside technology. The progression from simple button presses to motion controls to utilizing unique hardware features like gyroscopes shows that evolution requirements have been limited by available technology, suggesting that future generations might implement even more creative evolution triggers, utilizing whatever novel input methods or hardware capabilities future gaming devices provide for developers to incorporate into increasingly elaborate evolution requirements that showcase technological advancement. Fact 121. Evolution items are sometimes version exclusive or location specific, requiring exploration or trading to obtain items needed for completing evolutionary lines in games where items appear exclusively in locations that aren't accessible without extensive progress or aren't present at all in certain versions. This item distribution creates collection challenges where completing living Pokédex requires either thorough exploration, finding hidden items, or trading with players who obtained items from their game's exclusive locations, encouraging social interaction and rewarding thorough gameplay while potentially frustrating players who don't enjoy item hunting or who lack trading partners who can provide needed evolution catalysts. Fact 122. Multiple Pokémon sometimes share evolution triggers with entirely different species, using same stones or same methods, despite not being related, suggesting that different evolutionary lineages independently evolved sensitivity to same triggers through convergent evolution or through shared ancient ancestry. For example, multiple unrelated species evolve through moonstone or through friendship, implying that either these triggers affect broad biological pathways that many species utilize, or that distant common ancestor possessed sensitivity that descendant lineages retained, despite diverging into completely different forms that no longer resemble each other or each other's ancestors from which they separated millions of generations ago. Fact 123. Evolution sometimes grants abilities that pre-evolutions lacked, with hidden abilities often becoming available only after evolution provides access to ability pools that base forms couldn't access. These ability changes through evolution can dramatically alter competitive viability by providing evolved forms with abilities that counter their weaknesses or that enhance their strengths in ways that ability-locked base forms cannot achieve regardless of training or items, making evolution essential not just for stat improvements, but for ability access that enables strategies and roles that pre-evolutions cannot fulfill even when trained to equivalent levels and given equivalent resources. Fact 124. Paradox Pokémon in Scarlet and Violet don't evolve, despite some resembling past or future relatives of existing evolutionary families, suggesting they exist outside normal evolutionary relationships as temporal anomalies rather than as standard Pokémon following typical biological rules. This evolutionary stasis, despite apparent connections to evolved or unevolved forms of modern species, creates mystery about whether paradox Pokémon are genuinely ancient or future species, or whether they're something else entirely that coincidentally resembles evolutionary relatives without actually being related through common ancestry that would place them in same evolutionary families that modern counterparts belong to through established lineages. Fact 125. Regional variants sometimes lose evolutionary stages or gain them compared to original forms, with Galarian Farfetch'd evolving into Sirfetch'd, while regular Farfetch'd remains standalone, demonstrating that regional adaptation can alter fundamental evolutionary potential in ways beyond just changing appearances or types. These regional variations in evolutionary potential suggest that when populations separate and adapt to different environments, they don't just develop surface differences but can gain or lose entire developmental stages depending on whether local conditions favor additional maturation that original populations' environments didn't select for through evolutionary pressures, favoring different life history strategies between separated populations that diverged. Fact 126. Evolution can skip middle stages through unusual means, with Clamperl potentially evolving into either Huntail or Gorbis without passing through intermediate form, suggesting that branched evolution represents divergent development from shared juvenile form into specialized adult forms. This evolutionary pattern resembles real-world examples where single larval form can develop into dramatically different adult morphs depending on environmental or social cues experienced during development, though Pokémon compresses these processes into instant transformations that real-world metamorphosis accomplishes through gradual tissue reorganization during pupal or transitional stages that Pokémon evolution skips through. Instantaneous transformation. Fact 127. Ditto cannot evolve despite being one of earliest Pokémon designs and despite its transform ability, suggesting developmental plasticity that might enable evolution into various forms. This permanent single-stage status makes Ditto unusual among normal-type Pokémon, where most either evolve or are evolved forms themselves, creating question about whether Ditto represents fully developed species that doesn't require evolution, or whether it's permanently juvenile form that lost ability to mature into adult stage through some unknown biological quirk or through artificial origins. If theories about Ditto being failed Mew clone have any canonical validity within Pokemon lore. Fact 128. Evolution can restore HP percentage in specific circumstances in some spin-off games but never in main series, maintaining mechanical consistency where evolution is not healing technique but is purely developmental milestone. This distinction between mainline and spin-off mechanics demonstrates how different games within franchise implement evolution differently based on their specific gameplay needs, with some games treating evolution as tactical option that can be timed strategically while others treat it as narrative or progression element that happens between gameplay sequences rather than during active play where it might create balance issues or tactical complications that developers wanted to avoid. Fact 129. The actual biological mechanism of Pokémon evolution remains unexplained in-universe, with scientists in games studying phenomenon without reaching conclusions about how instant transformation occurs or what energy source enables dramatic mass increases and biological restructuring. This deliberate ambiguity preserves evolution's fantastic nature by not grounding it in pseudo-scientific explanation that would inevitably create logical problems, allowing evolution to remain magical or mysterious process that works through unknown principles that players can imagine differently depending on whether they prefer science fiction explanations involving energy conversion and quantum biology or fantasy explanations involving magic and life force that enables transformations, transcending physical laws. Fact 130. Evolution affects Pokemon's cry, in most cases with evolved forms producing different vocalizations than pre-evolutions, suggesting that transformation alters vocal anatomy, or that different forms have different communication needs, requiring different vocal signatures. These cry changes help players distinguish evolutionary stages by sound without checking status screens, providing audio feedback that evolution occurred successfully, while also suggesting that Pokemon's identity and communication methods change through metamorphosis that affects not just appearance and abilities, but vocalization patterns that might serve social functions, communicating evolutionary status to other Pokémon who recognize different cries as indicating different maturity levels. Fact 131. Breeding sometimes produces eggs containing pre-evolutions rather than base forms encountered in wild, with baby Pokémon like Pichu or Mime Jr. hatching from eggs, but rarely or never appearing in wild encounters. This suggests that these baby forms are natural starting points in evolutionary lines, but that they mature quickly in wild before most trainers encounter them, making baby forms domestication artifacts that captive breeding reveals, but that wild populations progress beyond so rapidly that observation of wild babies is rare, explaining why trainers encounter evolved forms without seeing babies that logically should exist before mature specimens that wild encounters predominantly feature. Fact 132. Evolution during special circumstances like during champion battle or during rival fight creates memorable moments that players remember long after forgetting routine evolutions that occurred during normal gameplay. These narrative-integrated evolutions demonstrate how context affects emotional impact, with evolution meaning more when it happens during significant moments rather than during grinding or random encounters, suggesting that evolution's psychological impact comes not just from transformation itself, but from circumstances surrounding evolution that create memories associating specific evolutions with specific challenges or victories that gave those transformations personal meaning beyond mechanical stat improvements. Fact 133. Some players deliberately avoid evolving Pokémon for challenge runs or for aesthetic preferences, creating communities around using unevolved teams or using specific, unevolved favorites, despite statistical disadvantages that refusing evolution creates. These player choices demonstrate that evolution isn't universally desired, and that some trainers value other qualities over raw power that evolution provides, validating design decisions, allowing evolution, prevention, and showing that Pokemon's flexibility accommodates diverse playstyles, including deliberately handicapping oneself through refusing evolution that would make game easier, but that would eliminate personal connection to specific forms that players prefer over alternatives that evolution would force upon them. Fact 134. Evolution rates vary wildly between species, with some evolving as early as level 7, while others not evolving until level 50 or beyond, creating varied progression curves where some lines peak early, while others remain weak for extended periods before reaching powerful final forms. These varied evolution levels allow Game Freak to balance early game and late game Pokémon by giving early route encounters quick evolution that makes them viable for early game, while giving later encounters higher evolution levels that delay their full power to maintain challenge progression throughout game, rather than allowing players to immediately evolve all catches into strongest forms without investment. Fact 135. Evolution represents one of Pokemon's most iconic and enduring mechanics that has defined franchise identity since 1996, when Red and Green first allowed players to witness Charmander transforming into Charmeleon through training and bonds. This simple but profound concept of creatures growing and changing through player investment created emotional attachment and sense of progression that distinguished Pokémon from other monster collecting games where creatures remained static, making evolution not just gameplay mechanic, but philosophical statement about growth, change, and potential that resonates with players across generations who see their own development reflected in Pokémon, who transform from weak beginnings into powerful forms through dedication, care, and time spent nurturing potential into realized strength. And so we conclude our comprehensive journey through 135 Pokémon evolution facts, having explored everything from evolution's basic mechanics, through stone-based transformations, through Mega Evolution's temporary power, through regional variants, different requirements, through biological mysteries that science cannot explain, through gameplay balance considerations, through player stories about favorite evolutions, and through final reflections on what evolution means within Pokémon franchise and within player experiences across nearly Pokémon 3 decades of games, anime, manga, and cultural phenomenon that transformed simple Game Boy games into worldwide entertainment empire recognized across generations and cultures. Evolution remains central to Pokémon's appeal because it captures universal human experiences about growth, change, transformation, and becoming more than what we start as through effort and through relationships that help us reach potential that we possess but cannot achieve alone. Watching Pokémon evolve creates satisfaction that parallels watching children grow or watching ourselves overcome challenges and become stronger, wiser, more capable versions of ourselves who retain core identity while transforming superficially and meaningfully through experiences that shape who we become across years and decades, that change us, just as evolution changes Pokémon from small, weak forms into powerful allies who have journeyed alongside us, becoming family through shared struggles and shared victories. The facts we've explored tonight reveal evolution's complexity, how it serves gameplay through progression systems, how it creates collection challenges through branched paths and special requirements, how it enables competitive strategy through timing and through choosing which form suit team needs best, how it generates emotional investment through transformation witnessing and through nurturing weak creatures into strong partners, and how it raises philosophical questions about identity, consciousness, change, and growth that extend beyond game mechanics into territory where Pokémon becomes metaphor for human development and human potential to transform through effort and through bonds with others who support our growth. Sleep now, dear friends, having completed this exploration of evolution that reminds us that change is natural, that growth requires patience and care, that transformation can be beautiful, even when it involves leaving behind comfortable, familiar forms for unknown new existence, and that potential exists within all of us, waiting to be realized through dedication and through connections with others who see what we might become and who help us achieve transformations that we couldn't accomplish alone without. Support from those who believe in our potential even when we doubt ourselves. May your dreams be filled with light of evolution washing over you as you transform through rest into renewed version of yourself who wakes refreshed and ready for tomorrow's challenges. May you grow through experiences just as Pokémon grow through battles. May you transform through learning just as Pokémon transform through stones and friendship and all the mysterious forces that enable metamorphosis from what we are into what we might become. Good night, trainers. Sleep gently, knowing that evolution continues even in rest, that growth happens even in darkness, and that tomorrow you'll wake slightly transformed by sleep's restorative power into better version of yourself, ready to continue your journey through this life, where we're all evolving constantly toward forms we haven't yet imagined we might someday become. Sweet dreams of transformation, dear friends, until we meet again in dreams or in daylight. Rest well in knowledge that your potential, like Pokemon's potential, is limited only by your willingness to grow and by your courage to embrace change. That evolution, whether biological, emotional, intellectual, or spiritual, demands from all beings brave enough to leave comfortable, familiar forms behind and venture into unknown territories where transformation awaits those willing to take risks that growth requires. Good night.